Hi everyone, this is Ryan and Victoria Cole, and you're listening and watching Needed Conversations.
And if you're listening by podcast, this is going to be our first episode that we upload onto my YouTube channel. So go search Ryan Cole Empowerment right now.
So now we have to look presentable.
Yeah, and subscribe. We wanted to add a little visual, especially for this week. But on my YouTube channel, I've got a lot of other teachings too that you'll find really interesting. And if you're on YouTube right now, make sure you hit subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you are updated every time I upload a video. It's at least every Monday at 7 p.m. I've got a new one. But also, you'll get Needed Conversations too.
Yeah, it comes out every Monday. So we have a lot of interesting topics that we have already covered. And a lot of those topics we try to focus on marriage and relationships. So today we decided to do this fun thing, which is we've seen a lot of people do. It's like a Google search thing.
It's called the Google Autocomplete interview.
Yeah. So we really looked up and searched things on marriage and what people searched on marriage. So these are the questions, the what and the hows and the whys of about marriage. So we just thought it'd be kind of fun to break it down a little bit.
Because really, we're doing this Summer of Love series on our podcast, and it's all coming down to July 22nd and July 23rd. That is this week. We are hosting a free webinar for everyone who is single, dating, or engaged. And we're going to be giving you principles in 2 sessions each night at 8 p.m. Eastern time on the 22nd and 23rd of July. You're going to get some dynamic teaching and some revelation and tools to help you find lasting love. Yes. So we're in this Summer of Love series, and we said to ourselves, I wonder what everyone or the average person or the most popular searches are on Google. Because, when anybody has a problem, the first thing they go to Google. I know anytime, I start feeling the sniffles or anything like that, and I'm sure everybody right now,
WebMD,
has Googled and said, what are the symptoms of coronavirus, just in case, But
that
people
can get you in trouble. I'm sure the doctors really hate that tool, but
people search everything on Google, and Google seems to have all the answers. But really, it just depends on who the source is. We know where our source comes from, and so we thought we would address some of those most popular searches about marriage. So here we go.
Maybe answer some of them.
And if you're listening to a podcast, we have the whole setup where we're going to peel off and find out what the first popular question is.
Okay, this is a lot harder than I thought. Hold on. Okay, the first one's going to be a little hard, but here goes. How does marriage work?
So that's what people are searching, huh? How does marriage work? Well, marriage...
you really need a manual for that because it's a whole separate thing, and I think people are scared of it. But yeah, why don't you tell them?
I think marriage is cooperation, and that's plain and simple. It's a partnership. And I think that's also where most people get it wrong, and probably why they're searching this, because by the time they've gotten into marriage, they're like, holy cow, I just have no idea what this is about.
What are the steps for making marriage work, probably?
Yeah, I just married him because he treated me kind and he had nice eyes or whatever.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, marriage only works if you work. So... hey, that's a tweetable right there, huh? Marriage only works if you work, and it comes down to cooperation. That's what I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely a partnership, and I think that you have to have good relational skills, which I think we are lacking in this world because we're so focused on like social media, Instagram, Facebook, and we see all these couples goals, like the hashtag couples goals. And so we sometimes can veer off of the actual reality of marriage. But it still can be beautiful. I think sometimes people get scared of it when they actually jump into it. And so that's when they are like searching the Google, like, how does this work? Because I don't think I'm doing this right.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what's the next? How does marriage counseling work? I think this is a good question. I think most people don't want to go to marriage counseling because they don't want their business out there. Yeah. Or they don't know who to trust, I think that when it comes to marriage counseling, it definitely should be something that you and your partner do together. I think if you need individual counseling, if you're struggling,
personal issues,
that's one thing. But when it comes to discussing the issues of the marriage, if both of you don't at some point come to the table, the marriage counseling just isn't going to work,
It's going to be
because
kind of one-sided. You're always going to say one thing, and
you
it
could
may
have,
not
and
be
you could be
fully
getting all the
true.
answers. You
Yeah.
could be getting a lot of growth tools, and your spouse is just complacent. So again, that takes cooperation. But marriage counseling normally works in phases, and it depends on how deep rooted the issues are in the marriage and how much that you're having to overcome. Whether it's just conflicts that are minor, or whether you're talking about adultery and or even abuse, really, when it comes to marriage counseling. I think it's important to do your research and to choose a Christian counselor.
Yeah. I
And
think it's important to have like a third party step in if you're having issues and it's something that you keep coming back and coming back to because you're not able to find any kind of resolve. And I think sometimes people lean into actually finding that third person to be a family member, and that's never a good idea. I think it's always good to find like a pastor that you guys both kind of are learning from, or sitting under, or somebody that you really know that have like a successful marriage that would be open to maybe mentoring you or helping you walk through this challenging phase of life.
that's a good point. I think even before you step into marriage counseling, I think finding other solid couples that you can get around is going to be vitally important. I think the worst thing that you can do is run to your friends, especially if they are single, with your problems. But marriage counseling works like that in a nutshell. Sometimes it can be, couple sessions, or it could be entire family therapy sessions, because some of the marriage problems probably have, actually, I guarantee you, have created this toxic web of just negative culture in your household with your kids too. So that's how it works. Let me see. What is the next? And the fact that people are searching that means that people are looking for help.
That's good.
And we're here to help. This is
Yep.
what we feel called to do. So stick around with us. How does marriage and religion link? Now, we can have a full preaching on this. If you haven't listened to our last episodes, that definitely gives you some type of context. But again, I think marriage is at the center of the gospel. The gospel is about a bride, the church, and her groom, which is Jesus Christ. And I think if you look from Genesis to Revelation, you see the story of marriage. And it's not just about one individual couple, but it's how marriage affects virtually every aspect of society, and how, as a culture, we are enriched when we promote traditional marriage. And when I say traditional, I don't mean like, status quo gender roles, but traditional in terms of like going back to the first marriage in Genesis, and what did that look like, and where were our missteps along the way.
Christianity for us is not a religion, it's a lifestyle. So it's something that we walk out, individually. But we really always, say that if you don't really know what your identity is or who you are, and we believe that you find that identity through Christ, then you're not able to love yourself. And in turn, you won't be able to love your neighbor, which, whoever that is, your spouse or the person you're dating or your mother, your brother, whoever it is. So it's definitely a lifestyle.
For sure. Yeah. And I think when people are searching this question, they're normally coming to the table with a relationship where you may be Christian and they're Muslim, or they're Hindu, or they're agnostic. And when it comes to your faith, it's such an integral part, especially as you grow older and more mature, you realize how important faith is in raising your children. So it's going to affect things. There are marriages that I, have heard about, they may be myths and legends of couples who one is one religion and one is the other, and they've somehow made it work. But, in taking all things into account, it's going to be a very, very big challenge. And not only religion, I think when it comes to being equally yoked, which is a popular scripture that people talk about, it's not just about, are you a Christian, but do you have a prayer life? Are you pursuing God? Do you have a relationship with God? Or are you living off the religion of your parents? And is this tradition for you, or is this living and breathing? And that also depends on your level of spirituality too. So you want to be compatible in that area.
That's true.
What else we got? You want to peel the next one?
Yep. I don't have any nails, so that might be a little hard. How do you parent in relationship and expectations? That's
I don't know what that question means a little bit, but
how do you parent in relationship and expectations? So basically, like in the marriage, or if you're in a relationship with somebody, how do you parent together, and what are the expectations?
oh, about raising your children?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess people would search that.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a challenge, and again, if you are both haven't worked out the details in regards to, how your marriage is going to work, then when you add children into the combination, it makes it that much harder. I think we did a whole episode on that as well, about children, about raising our personal, our own kids and the challenges that we had to address. Me being from a different culture, you being from a different culture, different upbringings, all of that plays a big role. So I think when a person is dating, if you have like those rose-colored glasses on and you really focus on like the physical attributes instead of what a deep down, belief a person has, then that would be really challenging for you in regards to parenting, because you got to like mesh all those together.
I think that you can't jump, bounce around these questions in the dating process. You can't just assume that that they have the same beliefs as you about children, about how many children they want to have.
Yeah, all of that
and
has
how
to be
they
talked with
and what kind
about.
of responsibility, Maybe you got into a marriage and they don't contribute to the parenting, but deep down they only had kids because you wanted to have kids.
That's true.
And so, while they love their children, I'm sure, maybe they just don't have the the passion to put in it like you do, and support you like you're needed. I give props to the single parents, of course, but
Yeah, you got to leave no room for assumptions. So that's why I think we focus so much on even the beginning phases when you're dating, to actually ask the right questions. Because if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to get the right answers. You know what I mean? Like if you don't ask yourself those questions, because some people don't even know what they personally believe. So they don't even ask that themselves.
Or they're afraid of asking the questions because they think that they will scare off somebody. Like if you're dating, I mean, this might not be a first date question, but it might
has
be.
To definitely
yeah, if you've been
across.
dating for a couple months and you haven't talked about what kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to have children? That's a big deal for some people. In fact, it's one of the reasons I broke off one of the relationships I had before Victoria, because she had completely different timelines and expectations about when she wanted to have children. And for me, it just wasn't going to work, as nice as she was. There were other issues, of course, but that was definitely one of them. I know we're kind of flying through this, but you people out there on Google are searching a lot about marriage. Does marriage counseling work? I think, again, it works if you work. I think that if both parties come to the table, I think that you have to become a lifelong learner, as an individual, but also as a couple, that you're continuing to grow together. I think a lot of people forsake investment in their marriage. And I think it's not just counseling, but I think this is more so a question of, are you investing in your relationship? Are you, studying together, growing together? Are you going to marriage conferences, or, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's definitely not like a check mark. It's a continual pursuit of a person, even though that a lot of times people become stagnant and they think that once they get married, all right, I'm done with this. Let's move on to the next thing, or let's focus on the career, or let's focus on the kids. So there has to be this fine balance of working together, building a life, but also discovering one another.
Yeah. And I think that, if you're asking this question because you feel like counseling is going to be like a medication, a pill that you can take and feel better, I think that you might get some temporary relief because you feel like that you're at least expressing what's going on. But again, if you don't put in the work, and it's a long-term investment. Most people think that marriage counseling or going to a marriage conference is something that you do when your marriage is in trouble. But I think that it could be something that you do just as an enrichment to your
Like a
relationship.
maintenance on the car.
For
You gotta
sure.
change your oil to keep
Got to get them
driving.
tires rotated. Got to get them tires changed. Some of y'all out here driving with a marriage that has some bald tires.
It's gonna pop.
Does marriage benefit everyone equally?
It should. It should, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think a lot of times we go into marriage thinking about our own happiness. One thing that I remember my mom told me when, my mom birthed 12 children. So, yeah, they're all my brothers and sisters. And so she's always told me that, marriage is a sacrifice. And I know some people don't want to hear that, but it's definitely not putting your personal needs before everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there are times for self-care and your happiness and all that stuff, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that your mission is to really focus on your family, on a family unit. It's not just about you anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that's
So the question,
it should benefit.
Does marriage benefit everyone equally? Well, if you're talking about a covenant and not a contract, if you sign a contract, right, there's certain terms and conditions that if one of the parties break their end of the bargain,
Then it's not valid.
then the contract isn't valid. A covenant is different.
comparison.
It's similar to a contract, but a covenant is built on grace and mercy. And if one person does not fulfill their end of the requirements of that covenant, you still are required to fulfill yours.
That's good.
And that talks about, history and the covenant that God makes with man. How many times have we betrayed God, yet he has been faithful to us? And even with this, understanding that there are seasons in your life when you may be benefiting more than your spouse. And then there may be seasons when they're benefiting more than you. Maybe it's a time where you've decided to help your spouse get that degree, so you help work them through college by taking on a bunch of jobs so that they can get their degree, because you know that there's going to be a longer term benefit. And then also, just talking about seasons of heartache and hardship, that one spouse will need more than the other, and it's just a tug and pull. Not a tug of war, but really a push and pull that you give in that relationship whenever you need something to know that they're there.
That's good.
I hope that answers that question. So curious, you little Google searchers. The next question that you are curious about on Google: does marriage ruin relationships? That's a fear people have.
I mean, if it's talking about like personal relationships, like friendships, I don't think it ruins it. I think that there's a new set of boundaries that come along with.
I don't think that's what they're asking, but you
what
can
are-
answer
what
that
are they-
question too.
What are you
I
talking
think
about?
that
Oh, you're
they're-
talking about personal like with them.
Right, because
Oh,
the
okay.
dating is so good.
Okay.
And then especially if you're living together and you are having sex, like there's this kind of misconception out there that just that whole idea of marriage puts pressure on the relationship where both of you can't be happy. You think of the Oprah Winfrey and the Stedmans. She's been with the man for probably 30 years, and they're still not married. Technically speaking, they're
Legally,
married.
yeah.
Yeah, but probably in the eyes of God, marriage happens at, consummation in the bedroom. But that's when the one flesh process begins. Marriage isn't about a certificate. So I would say if you're doing it God's way, marriage enriches the relationship. If you're doing it your own way and you're happy in your sinful life as of now, then I think that marriage is only going to magnify the problems that you don't even know exist.
You know what our culture really magnifies is what another thing that really kind of doesn't sit well with me is when people get married, they have like these, and I'm not talking about like the good, parties that they throw for a female and the man, sometimes, they'll just have females get together. Like personally for us, we had people get together and they'll give us advice, like marriage advice. But most people come with, from our culture, not from our culture, from the culture in general, they'll say like, this is the last time that you get to party and do what you want because you're going to be with that one person for the rest of your life. It just sounds so like gruesome, like, and sounds weird. Like, oh, no
It
more
sounds like it's
party.
a
Like,
death sentence.
yeah, and
They
it's just
used to
so.
say that your spouse is the old ball and chain. I mean, that is literally shackles. And that is so horrible to think about when stepping into a lifelong relationship. Who wouldn't get cold feet at the altar if you think about it that way? But instead, what if you consider the amazing benefits that come with marriage?
Yeah.
There are definitely limitations, but there are definitely liberties that you have that you wouldn't have as a single person. Now, you take the Oprah Winfrey's of the world, and that's kind of a separate equation because she's married. She may not call it marriage, but she's been in a committed relationship for over 30 years, and that's her one and only. I don't know exactly what her faith is, but I think that puts out there this false narrative that could potentially be a strategy. Just because you don't call it marriage, let's not put pressure on this, doesn't mean the relationship won't have challenges. It's going to be exactly the same challenges that you face. And I say that too for people who are living together. Like, why not just get married?
All right.
Okay.
Next one.
Next one.
Does marriage make you happier?
Does marriage make you happier?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. We always, we talk a lot about relationships, and honestly, true love is a choice. And so whenever we can't really drive our life by our feelings and emotions because that can get us into trouble. I mean, every decision that you make in life, especially when it's like a major one, you don't ever want to be driven by emotions. You want to, step back and logically think things through and see how it will all affect all aspects of life. So what we always say is that whenever you make a choice to love, that those feelings and emotions will follow.
Right.
It may not be the same hour, the same day. Like personally for me, it takes me a minute to get back because I just, I guess maybe it's dysfunction and it's something that I have to work on, but like it feels hard for me to jump back. And I think maybe it's for females. Maybe it's for females. They hold grudges a little bit longer than men. Men tend to kind of like, let's talk this through. Okay, we've talked this through. We resolved it. Let's get over that
It
and
no
go.
longer exists. Yeah.
So, but I think for females it takes a little bit longer because we kind of compile everything together.
But I think marriage can enrich your life. I think happy is such an ambiguous word because how do you measure happiness? I think fulfillment is more important than happiness. Joy is more important than happiness. I think happiness is like a fleeting word. Like, I went to an amusement park and it made me happy, or I laughed at this movie and it made me happy. But that happiness can go as quickly as it came. And so what a marriage gives you is lasting effects. Sure, there are challenges, of course, but you're going to get fulfillment, significance, partnership, joy. You're going to have someone there with you in sorrow.
You're not going to be lonely, you'll have
Right.
a person with you at all times.
In
And
a healthy relationship, you are getting deeper set emotions that are flowing throughout your life. It's not just kind of these momentary experiences, but it's a more committed one. That's good. What else?
how to have a successful marriage. I think we kind of covered it, but that could be like a whole big, course on that. And I think we'll
I'm
cover that
encouraged
later.
though that this is a part of the top searches.
Yeah.
I
Hopefully
think,
people do this before they get married.
right. And I hope that maybe we come up in some of the top search results there when it comes to
Yeah.
having a successful marriage. And also, before we go to the next one, what does success mean? Right? If a lot of people deem success in comparison to this, ambiguous measuring rod out there, and they end up comparing their relationship to everyone else's. But I think success is the fulfillment of your purpose. And if you take that individually and you get married based on how you relate to each other's purpose, then at the end of your life, you can say, well, did we fulfill our purpose? And that would determine whether or not you were successful, not whether or not you portray to the world as if you are in puppy dog love every moment of your life.
Yep. Live up to the
Be
Instagram
real.
expectations. So the next one is, what is marriage? I mean, marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman.
That's right.
One man, one woman,
That's
according to
right.
the scriptures.
That's right. You want to give an example? Let's go to the book of Genesis, and that'll give you the example of the first marriage. And people always talk about polygamy too, just because polygamy was recorded in the Bible doesn't mean it was God's plan for marriage. There's a lot of things that people did in the Bible that God didn't approve of, but I think that he still used people despite the circumstances that they were in. And I think that's true when it comes to marriage as well. And when it comes to what society deems as marriage and whether or not you have a marriage certificate, the Bible says marriage is between one man and one woman.
Yep.
It's one flesh experience. Next.
Why do people get married?
Why do people get married?
I think for companionship.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would probably be the first thing. I think most people think of marriage as a long term, hopefully, And so I think when they think of like old age and they see these older couples and they're holding hands and they're walking to the store, or the man is opening the door for the lady, and you could just tell that they have a really good bond and a good friendship. And I think that's what people really yearn for.
I think that's the best case scenario, though.
But people don't see the work behind it.
When it comes to why do people get why do people get married? I think that a lot of people get married because they feel like it's the next step in their life.
That's true. Big season.
You graduate high school, you go to college, you have the college experience, you graduate college, you start a career, you get married, you have kids, you grow old. So you feel like, this is kind of ingrained within our culture and movies and all of this, that it's the next step. And I think that timing part of it is the most important, that you are ready for marriage, that you feel like that you are at a place where you can take on the responsibility of being a spouse to someone else and loving unconditionally. And you've worked through all of your issues, not that you're perfect, but that you are as prepared as you can be. But people get married because they're pressured, because their mom and dad want them to get married and have kids. Culturally appropriate, whatever.
At that age. Why do people get divorced? Oh, that's a big one, because I think that there's many reasons why people get divorced, but I think that's to the question of I'm not happy is the biggest thing. And I think when people say those kind of statements, what it makes me understand is that they actually don't truly understand or haven't actually experienced what true marriage is.
Or true happiness
is. Because it wasn't a focus about you. I think when a person focuses their attention and says that I'm not happy, that my needs weren't fulfilled, then that sounds very narcissistic, and that's not what marriage is about.
Right. It's definitely learning sacrifice. And it's not forsaking yourself as an individual, but it's definitely laying your life down for another person.
And I think that's when all these things step in, where you start, going your separate ways. You start, moving away, and then you kind of start justifying different actions, which can lead to affairs and other things.
The most popular cause, from my understanding, on divorce application is irreconcilable differences. And that's just a fancy way to say we just couldn't get along. But I think that you didn't put in the work either. Yeah. I think people get divorced because of financial reasons. I think they get divorced because of adultery and lust and a lack of discipline. When it comes statistically to why people get divorced, those are probably the top two. Financial is way up there, and adultery, of course.
Next one. How do I marry someone?
How do you marry someone? Well, you first have to find someone.
Find somebody.
What is going on in people's minds when they're typing in Google, how do I marry someone? Well,
there's a 10-step process.
No, I think that my book is a good example of the process that you should take of going through the outer court, the inner court, and the holy of holies of marriage. And then a marriage is officially consummated through sex, and that a merging of the two flesh into one,
Mm-hmm.
and this echad, this one person that is expressed in two people kind of experience. But what's next?
Why do couples get separated? And I know that we've had that discussion earlier that you
Yeah.
wanted to talk about what's currently trending.
Right. And I think separation is I think separation can be a good thing for couples who are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to first preface this by saying that you should take abuse completely out of this conversation. If you
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing abuse in any way, you need to escape that relationship and find safety. And I never would push someone to be in a relationship where there's abuse. But when it comes to just irreconcilable differences in the relationship, and in fact the majority of them are reconcilable, but it takes a lot of sacrifice. Separation can be good, but this is what I would say about separation. There's not really a lot in the Bible about separation, but what I can tell you is from experience and wisdom, talking with other couples, counseling couples, you have to set a beginning and an end date on that separation.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to set goals and personal goals on what you hope to accomplish. Not that you want to separate because you just can't take them anymore, but because you need to get alone with God. Not that you need to get alone with yourself, but you need to take that time, and I would say separate for no longer than about 2 weeks, and you need to fast and pray, and you need to come back to the table and consult with your spouse about how you can create a viable path forward and kind of merge your lives back together. Long-term separation is just, you're going to end up divorced. I mean, it's just, you're not going to end up reconciling with these long-term separations. If you do, it'll be an anomaly, a miracle, things that really don't happen. But you take about a 2-week break, that can be healthy, even an overnight break, just to think about, when it comes to my wife and how we process disputes, she needs time away. When we have something that's come to a head, she needs to take a walk. She needs some time, a day or so. And it's not that she leaves this house, although I've told her before in some of our arguments, do you need to go stay at your mom and dad's house? But she never does.
No, it's really just to think things through.
But when it comes to her kind of dealing with that internally, it does better for our relationship if she has time to think. And it does better for me too, even if I'm impatient. But the reason I like this question, I think it's relevant, is because we were watching a show the other night, Madam Secretary, and it's one of our kind of our binge series that we watch on Netflix. But there was this one character who was a policy negotiator, and his job was so intense, and he was negotiating peace between two countries in the Middle East, and his wife just couldn't take it anymore. And they out to dinner. She was like, I need some space. And they went into a separation, and I turned to Victoria and said, I totally understand that. I totally get her frustrations and, all of that. But then later in the episode, it turns out that now she's having an affair on her husband, or she's dating someone else, and she's justifying it because they're separated. And it just angered me because I'm like, you didn't want help. You just wanted an excuse to go do what you wanted to do. And then came Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith. Mm-hmm. They had this whole thing about, if you haven't heard about it, Will Smith, I'm sure you know who that is. His wife, a couple years ago, was involved with this guy, and he recently came out in an interview. He's a musician, talking about how they dated and Will Smith let him date and all of these, things and about their marriage. And they wanted to set the record straight, but in setting the record straight, Twitter just blew up about, what that meant. And then even in the conversation, I think the reason she came to the table to have this dialogue on a national forum is she wanted to set the record straight that, hey, we were separated. So it was okay that I was in a quote unquote entanglement with this other person. And then it was okay that you went out and slept with those people, and it's okay. And it makes it acceptable that it's almost like a free pass, that as long as you're separated, if you're dating someone else, that's not what marriage is about. And we idolize these celebrity couples if they last longer than 10 years, and then we give them some sort of label as being a sage, old, wise couple, when the foundation of their marriage isn't built upon the values that God gives us in the Bible, that really enrich our marriages in every way. And that's not to saying that, and it's not to, say that their marriage, I'm not supporting it. They should be married. I hope that they work through it. It sounds like they are. But I think the narrative that it puts out there about separation being a license to go and date around is a dangerous one. And number two, not calling adultery what it is. It's adultery. You were still married. You slept around with another person. That's sinful. It's got to be addressed, and you got to own up to it. That's part of the healing process, is owning up to it. And it was a mistake. And I think that's interesting that people are searching this, even in light of that came out recently with them. I hope that helped somebody out there, even if you're considering separation.
How does marriage counseling work? Didn't we already cover that one?
Yes, we did.
Oh, it showed up again.
People are doubly searching.
How does marriage affect credit score?
Ooh,
That's our
actually,
last
I
one.
just checked my credit score before we came on here, and I was delighted by it. But marriage can affect your credit score. But one word of advice that I would say is that in certain aspects of your finances, I think it's good, and it protects you as a couple to keep some of the things separately. So as if there is a default on one, that it doesn't affect the both of you. And there's kind of a way, even with our house, that our house is in my name, but she is listed as kind of a beneficiary, or I forgot what the name of it is, but I don't know if it's directly attached to your credit, but it's attached to mine. Not that we would ever default on our house, God willing.
But that way we build, our personal scores, because when we first got married, we still kind of paid, when we try to mesh each other stuff together, I kind of paid a couple of bills, you paid a couple of bills, and then there's a couple of things that we did together.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of grow into your marriage, and then I decided to stay home and all that stuff.
Then we started to merge our accounts and that kind of thing.
Your budget changes.
It definitely should be something that you talk about, because you take on the debt of that other person, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
It may not be on paper, your name might not be on it, but as
that
long as
burden,
you are one,
you'll feel that burden.
for sure. Student loans, personal loans, credit cards, have that conversation. Maybe that's a deal breaker. If they're coming to the table with an automatic $100,000 of debt, which is not uncommon, how are you going to work through it? And is that a symptom of their lack of discipline when it comes to finances? Should this be a broader conversation? So you best be believing that marriage can affect your credit score.
Yeah.
And in our society, a credit score is a big deal. Not that you can't do anything without a credit score. You certainly can. People live off the grid all the time. But I think it's just the world that we're living in. Credit is important.
Yep, when it comes to making large purchases.
So these were the top Google searches, and it's really interesting to think about that this is what people are searching when it comes to marriage and relationships. And we hope that we've been able to give you some expertise on all of those topics, because if somebody searched it, I'm sure you've been curious about it at some point. We do want to invite you to go right now. The link is in the description here on YouTube. It's in the description on all of our podcasting sites, wherever you listen to your podcast. RyanColeEmpowerment.com. Join us on July 22nd to the 23rd for our Lasting Love webinar. If you're single and you want to be married, if you're dating, if you're engaged and you just want to make sure that you have all the tools you need for a successful marriage, We want you to be there on this webinar, but you've got to sign up. There's limited space, a limited number of people we can fit into our webinar. So you've got to sign up right now. And hey, call up your friends, text them, send them the link and say, sign up for this webinar and join me on the 22nd and 23rd of July this week for Lasting Love webinar.
Summer of Love webinar.
Oh, Summer of Love.
He got lasting love on his mind.
Yes, because,
But it's called Summer of Love. So, yeah, make sure that you message your friends to join you together. That way you're not feeling alone. But we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to both the podcast channel and the YouTube channel, and share with your friends or tag somebody.
As always, thank you for listening to Needed Conversations. We will see you next week.
Bye.